year, if you happen to be at that meeting, I talked about how to put debate into your classroom, and I'm obsessed with digital media. So I filmed that. It's on YouTube if you want to see that one. I'm not going to repeat that today. I'm going to take us in a different direction. So instead of bringing debate into your classroom, how can you bring classroom sort of into debating and argument and some of the things you might not have thought of that you could use to kind of make your class a little bit more spicy, a little bit more flavorful, using some stuff in your pedagogical kitchen that you might not think goes together. That's what we're going to talk about. So all I have to offer to you today are ideas. Ideas that you can adopt to fit the context and the culture of your classroom. Everybody in here, it's like we're all going to our little country. Your classroom is going to have its own little culture, mine is going to have its own, and I don't know what explains that. You have one class back to back with another one. They're two totally different planets sometimes. I don't know what explains that, but as teachers we have to adapt to that. That's our role. The inspiration for this is I was thinking about, we always say we're teachers or professors, but what does that mean? What's the metaphor for that? What does it mean to be a teacher besides I teach stuff? What does it mean to be a professor besides I profess? What does that mean? I mean, these are like answers we'd mark wrong, on a quiz. But this is what we say. So what's the appropriate metaphor? What's the appropriate thought for that? And that's where I kind of started to think, well, maybe there's different ways to think about this. So here's some ideas about how you can make your class a little bit more argumenty. We said truthiness earlier. Yeah. So we can make up words, I guess. Argumenty or debatey. Well, present textbook certainties as vibrant controversies. This is probably the easiest one to do. Jamie gave a great presentation about this book. I hate to tell her, there are about 5,000 books that disagree with this out there, all by other companies vying for your dollar to teach or whatever. So each chapter here you can find something on the internet or some other thing that contrasts with this. And then you can present that as a controversy. So you can show a speech that violates a rule. You can find tons of those. TED Talks is a great place to show that everything that we teach in our class, professional speakers don't do half of it. You can find any award speech or anything that you think the students would like and say, okay, now why was that speech good even though it broke these rules that were in your textbook? And that can generate a controversial discussion that then you can have students kind of go back and forth on, and that can enliven and make the class a little bit more spicy. The advantage of this is that the students then sort of take ownership of a position that they may not do if you just teach them the chapter in the book and then give them a quiz. They'll be like, okay, well that's the thing. There was a study, it's really good timing, there's a study came out 2 days ago from Canada, the University of Ontario, study about critical thinking, which is something I'm always looking at. And the study is very new. I haven't read the whole thing, but the summary of it indicated that instead of what we traditionally do, which is embed critical thinking skills into a course sort of hidden, and we do them kind of over time, it's actually better to in your face teach them, and teach them directly, and explain their importance, and do it consistently over years. That seems to be what works better, according to this new study. Now this is new research that kind of goes against a large amount of research behind it, so we should be skeptical, right? We should be skeptical. But we should, I haven't read the book, I'm just kind of cheating off of them.
No, you're doing well. You're already bringing in some certainty versus probability models in there too, so.
But this is interesting to think about, is like, what is critical thinking? Is it a skill? Is it I like to think of it as a practice, going to the gym, or martial arts. I think about martial arts a lot in my teaching. So it's like something you have to practice, you have to spar quite a bit to keep it up. Or like a language, if you don't speak it, you lose your ability. A lot of us might go overseas, and we really kind of pick up the language, and they come back here, and then we can't function at all. And we meet that French tourist in Manhattan, and we're like, oh yeah, I forgot how to say cheese, which is a pretty important word in French. So it's a problem. Okay, so the other thing you can do is present 2 discussions of a concept as a reading, and then you can either assign them to take one section or the other, or have them associate. This is a wonderful discussion technique. You say, if you agree with it, go to this side of the room. If you agree, go to this side of the room. And students like this kind of activity. My students like activity. They like doing stuff. This is weird for me because I love listening to lectures. Like, I used to be a big C-SPAN addict. I got better. But I used to really sit and watch C-SPAN for hours. It's very bad for you to sit in one place for a long time. But I was happy with it. But this is unusual for me. But our duty, I think, is to adapt to what the students want. if you have trouble getting students to read or participate in readings and you feel like you're spoon feeding them the textbook, give students a short assignment to make an opening statement for or against any class reading that you assign. And then have students who want to respond to it come up and respond to it in situ, right, in the moment as they're doing it. I think that's a wonderful way to kind of inspire people to maybe do the reading a little bit better. Say, okay, as we go through the reading, you're going to have to do an opening statement on the reading to the class, either for or against it. I thought this chapter was terrible, I thought it was good, or here are the things. You can set up that rubric however you want. It's a good way to kind of get people engaged. So here's some suggestions of things that you can have them argue about in the class or debate about. Winging it's better than outlining. Plagiarism no longer exists in the digital world. Or sitting is better than standing at a podium. These are like things you can bring up to have them fight about readings and stuff. Yep?
Would you have them do research on this, or would you have them do like off the cuff?
I would have them, you can do it either way.
Okay.
If you want to do the model where you say, I'm going to give you a couple of different discussions about this, then you would want to have in your rubric that they cite or they look at or they bring in those readings into what they said. It really depends on what you want to teach and what you want to communicate. So my feeling on that is they could do independent research if they want. If I was going to do the thing where they do opening statements for the assigned reading, I'd say you can bring in whatever research you want, and you'll be surprised at what they bring in. They'll bring in stuff that you're probably not familiar with. That's usually what happens to me. Like I'm going to talk about this later, but students come to us fully formed. Behind them is this incredibly rich and complex life of hates, likes, dislikes, passion, and sadness, and deep love that we kind of forget about when we're teaching. And we think of them as little vessels that need to be filled with the knowledge they could never possibly have except for me. And I think if we get rid of that idea, when we say they come to us fully formed, then they'll bring in all kinds of weird stuff when you do this opening statement. They'll be like that movie, and you'll be like, I've never heard of that movie. And then you have a new movie to watch. So really, it's really kind of like stealing, which makes it cool. Because the students paid you to teach them, and then they're giving you all this cool free material, and you go home and entertain yourself with it. It's fantastic. At least you know what to Google. Kim Kardashian.
Steve, how long would you give for the opening statement activity?
Myself, I would do like 5 minutes.
Okay.
But you could do less, more. The point of it is not necessarily how long. The point of it is how vibrant, how much time have you reserved that day for class discussion of the reading?
Got it.
Or for a traditional lecture. If you were going to do a traditional PowerPoint out of here, I mean, it's all well and good, there's lots of resources and stuff, but that can get to be a little, even we get bored. I mean, I hate to say it, but I mean, how long can you, this is a bad question for me, but how long can you listen to your own voice? I mean, you're kind of in that nightmare world right now. It's like, I can listen to my voice for a very long time.
I was there, just
But mixing it up like this is good too. Plus, with this idea that we should be teaching skills long-term directly over time with that research, it seems to me that in a speech class they should be speaking as much as you can get them to speak. And not every speech reinforcement has to be a big, major graded assignment. There can be think about writing across the curriculum. Over in the Writing Center, or if you've had writing consultants come to your classroom, they'll say things like, have them write up a little summary of what you lectured. Things like that. Why can't we do that in speech as well? A little opening statement, a little opinion sharing, and then the other students are hearing it from a peer. So it's a nice way to kind of get, it's like leftovers again. I mean, I like cooking metaphors, but it's like, no, I put a little spice in there. It's a little different, right? So that's the first idea, is present textbook certainties as vibrant, passionate controversies. Outlining. Everyone's just fired up about outlining. I mean, they're not going to know. They're going to believe you, right? So everyone's fired up about how many sources you should have from books. Get them to fight about it. It'll be fun. Make life the content of your course, right? This is what I was talking about a minute ago. Students come to us fully formed as opposed to lacking something or flawed. They need something from us. They come fully formed. They brought all the resources you need into the classroom for you to play with. So try to use some of that stuff. Get them to bring in controversies and issues that matter to them as things they could do for speeches and as speech topics they could do. This is hard to do because there's a little bit of a trust barrier there.
Yeah.
But if you find the students talking about stuff that seems to be passionate to them, try to bring it into the class. You don't really have to know about it. You don't have to it feels kind of icky sometimes to get involved in some of these things. You're like, why are they interested in this? I feel gross. But you don't necessarily have to get into it. All you have to do is be some kind of an observer and advisor to say, look at how the principles of speech that we did in these other things are working their way into this controversy. Look at how the principles of communication are at play here. Years ago, I used to do a whole unit in my argumentation class on, this is very old now, but on Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake's relationship.
Oh,
And
wow.
I learned a lot. It's not very valuable information, but I learned a lot. So if you're one of these people who likes, Golden Corral or someplace like that, quantity over quantity, this is the kind of thing you can bring in your class. But whatever they're into, it's not necessarily the controversy that's important, it's the fact that they're passionate about it. And that you can turn it into and say, look at how that supporting claim works there from this YouTuber. I mean, they're watching a lot of these talking heads on YouTube. They're watching a lot of that. And this public speaking. Like there's no possible way that's not public speaking. It doesn't look like the Chautauqua circuit. We're not interested in a stiff collar behind some church pew. Being like, I'm so glad everyone from the town of North Hampshire came out tonight. There's no trembling jowls involved. But it's still public speaking. It's just changed a bit. It's somebody else's old public speaking, right? 1,000 years from now, it might fun. But for us, it's what we got, right? And then the line of student-teacher becomes blurred once you start to learn about what makes them tick and how they think as you go into the controversy. So you could have them anonymously submit popular controversies if you want to get past that trust barrier. That's the biggest barrier to doing this. And then you could have them do the speech and then do a speech again and improve it. One of the things I think that we lack, that I think in writing scholarship and in composition scholarship is really something that we ought to think about as public speaking teachers, is the concept of reiteration. That is, your students are nervous about speaking because nobody wants to share a first draft. And that's what we're doing. That's what they're doing on speech day. They wrote that on the bus, right? No matter what they told you, right? They got a 6-pack and a computer at 10:30 at night and fired up Netflix, and they're like, here we go. 3 things I love about my grandma. Right? Nobody wants to share. That's why they're so nervous. Nobody wants to share a first draft. If you diminish that, if you put them in their comfort zone, and then you say, we're going to do this speech as an iteration, and then we're going to reiterate it, you can start to see them really kind of blossom, right? It's like with first drafts, it's like Thich Nhat Hanh, right? No mud, no lotus, right? That's one of his famous sayings, right? Can't get the lotus. If you don't like the mud, you're not ever having a flower, right? So you have to have that bad draft, but you should communicate with them that it's a first iteration, that it's a bad draft. We should have reiteration. The power of that is something that we don't question at all in writing, but in speech we kind of do this one-off. And it would be nice to say, let's do it, now let's redo it, and let's do it again. And that's what you can do by making their life, their controversies part of the course material. Here's some roles you can take as a mentor, as a guide, when you're doing this kind of teaching. You can provide alternative information. If they all want to talk about Black Lives Matter or climate change, I don't know what might motivate them and what you want to permit. But your role can be to provide sources they might not look at. They might be very well informed. You might be surprised at how well informed they are. But they might not be looking at sources that would broaden, deepen, make sharper, make better their articulation of the controversy. So you can be that person to say, hey, I found this for that thing that Michael gave a speech last week and he said this, but I found this article. You can put it on Blackboard. Then Blackboard becomes this kind of vibrant place of sharing documents. So that happened before. It's sort of like, it's like cooking. Sometimes you really get a good batch and sometimes it takes a little bit more work. But that's a role you can take. You can also suggest broader controversies. They might be interested in a mindless, from your point of view, a mindless pop culture controversy about a singer or something. But it might connect to larger questions about class, race, economic arrangements, the way that entertainment is produced and consumed. You're the person who can bring in those larger concerns to them. And really kind of be like, they can be like, oh, this stuff that we're doing in my sociology class actually matters. And you're like, yeah. So you can kind of be this ambassador for the university. We're going to transition to that. And then you can also be a demonstrator of the intellectual response. I'm a believer that being an intellectual it's not a state, it's a habit. It's something that one does. So you can say, you can sort of demonstrate for them what the intellectual citizen's response to these controversies and stuff ought to be. We're not perfect at it because no one is an intellectual, I don't think. It's something that we practice and it's like an aspirational goal. But here's how I would respond to it as an intellectual. And I think that's one of the values that goes counter to society that the university's kind of forgotten about. Like, as I'll talk about here on the next slide, the university's a knowledge creator, not a job creator.
Amen.
right? The job creator, so the job creator rhetoric is an example of poisoning yourself with something that was meant for somebody else, right? Brings the students in to get them to be like, here's why this investment is good, and it's a bait and switch, right? And then we say, here's what it is to know, and here's what it is to question knowledge, and here's what it is to have an epistemic position, right? This is the skepticism stuff that we heard about from the book earlier. You can demonstrate that by saying, here's the practice that I would take, and here's why these controversies matter. And here's why people talk about them. They don't just talk about them because they're fun, but they go to these old narratives, and we can speak about those. And if you can access that and communicate about that clearly, you can access a kind of a power that a lot of your peers don't have access to. And you can access a way of conversing and talking about the world a lot of your friends don't have access to. It can be very empowering to students, very empowering to them. Like I know a lot of us teach the fallacies, yeah? It's sort of like, that's a micro of sort of what I was suggesting here. Because a lot of times students get really into the fallacies. It's like when you take your 8-year-old to karate, and they learn the high kick, and then they go around your house high kicking everything. There goes your favorite lamp, there goes the cat. Wow, you know, please don't high kick the wall. Like the shoe prints are all over the place. It's kind of like that. They feel really empowered, they want to use it in the world. And this is sort of like that kind of a response. So, open research for a topic might be a good thing we do. We always talk about student research quality and how to improve that. We have this technology here called Panopto. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not. It's kind of like, I liked the other one better.
Voice
screen recording. What was it?
Like voice thread?
Yeah, like
I
voice
kind of
thread.
incorporated that into my, as a sort of a preliminary speech, right?
Yeah.
So I put a voice thread in it. I like to experiment with technology too.
Me
I use it
too.
a lot, Blackboard a lot.
Mhm.
So I want to see what the reaction is, but I want the other students to see this informative or introduction speech so they all can see their own speeches. And then I want to have a discussion about what actually transacted.
Mhm.
See? So maybe this will get some debate going, at least initially.
I think it will. And I also think it's good what you're doing because you're taking their speeches and you're saying these are texts that are worth studying in the class. So your students are producing texts, and then you can treat them as if you had given them a reading. You say, okay, what does this mean? Why is this good? Why is it bad? And you can sort of teach them that sort of critical eye, which is what you're good. What's good about VoiceThread. What I was suggesting with this is there's some screen recording software out there. Panopto does it for PowerPoint.
Yeah.
There's another one. There's Microsoft Mix, which is free if you have the Microsoft Office on your computer at home, where you can record your screen.
Yeah, Windows 10 comes with Microsoft Games, like an embedded controller that you can record.
Oh, will that record anything?
Yeah.
Oh. It only pops up when I'm playing video games.
Well,
I didn't think it would.
no.
That's good. I can
I
record.
learned that trick last Friday.
Yeah, that's great.
It works.
So the point of the screen recorder is why not record a short YouTube video of you and what your steps are when you start to research a topic you'd like to know more about. It puts you on the same level as the student, I don't know. And then what are those steps you do? And the students can follow along, and it's a lot more disarming and open than making a bunch of requirements for research stuff in a speech. And you say, well, how would I approach a topic I'd like to know more about? Where do I go? And whatever you do is going to be better than what they do. Even if you're not a great researcher and you don't have confidence in your research abilities, that's fine. But whatever you do is going to show them, hell yeah, this is like an art. There's different ways to do this. Instead of like something they resist to the last minute, and then embarrassingly they're like, well, I need 3 sources, I'm just going to go find whatever. They feel the pressure of that, and they have never been taught how to do that or what to do. And one of the things we can do as instructors that I think is brilliant is to model, again, modeling the intellectual behavior, model what we would do if we'd like to know more about, I don't know, really disastrous hurricanes that have hit the U.S. How would we go into that? Where would we start? And I can see you guys are kind of thinking already, yeah, where would I go on the internet? What would I go to first? Any of that would be valuable to share with your class. And you can record it and record your narration about what you're thinking, post it on Blackboard. It could be an incredibly valuable way to say, look at what the university gives us as far as research tools. So no, I would go to the databases first. Have your students provide a bibliography for a topic, and then you provide one. And then you compare them. Hey, what's good about what Sammy or Tina did, and what did I do, and how are these different? That might be a good starting place. Instead of, a lot of times the bibliography is like the ending of an assignment. Why not start there? Say, go and find 5 or so sources or anything, bring them to class, and we'll all share. Or post them on the Blackboard, and then you can project them and say, what's good about this? What's good about these sources? And how does it compare to what I did for my bibliography for this topic? That might be a cool way for them to say, oh yeah, this is something that we can discuss. This isn't a secret hidden rule book by some cult of professors, hidden away somewhere they don't have access to, that then they have to guess and jump through invisible hoops to get it right. That's kind of how they feel about a lot of these assignment requirements. And you can sort of open it up and say, this is stuff that you can, it's normal, it's healthy, and it's fun to practice in your daily life. Split up your groups into web and library-based sources, so you can all have them all do the same speech. Say you can only use resources you find on the open internet, and you can only use resources you find in the library, and then compare what they come up with. And that might really give them a contrast to be like, wow, maybe Google isn't that great. Or maybe Google is great, but it's motivated by consumer capitalism. Whereas academic research might not be. It's motivated by other terrible things, but not consumer. And then have a debate with and without library resources. This is kind of like a shout out to my talk last year at this time, where you can use debate as a starting point for knowledge instead of an ending point. So one of the greatest, I think, societal failures we've had is to think of debate and speech as the ending of a research process rather than the beginning of a research process, where you have like 17th and 18th century models of debating where they have the debate first and then they're like, well, I don't know. You know, talk about the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Very famously, Stephen Douglas asked Abraham Lincoln a question. He said, just imagine this happening in contemporary political debate. He said, I don't know, but I could go research it, so give me a 3-hour break. I'm going to go to the library. We'll all come back here and I'll answer Mr. Douglas's question. And everybody was like, that sounds very reasonable, and they left. That would never happen today. Why is that? It's something to think about. Our relationship to truth and facts and information is very different. If it's not instant, if it's not delivered with a faux certainty and hostility, then it's not true, right? And we get that from cable news, right? And a lot of other places. So, but Lincoln was like, I'm going to go research it. And he spent 3 hours. He came back and he gave a very good answer to this question. It was a legal question that he wasn't sure about, and he wanted to go look at the case law. But you can go look at that in the transcripts of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Also in the Lincoln-Douglas debates, Douglas's supporters carried around like a 18-pound brass cannon that anytime they thought Douglas made a really good argument, they would fire it off. So that's not good for your class. No. Unless you want public
Maybe
safety
that's
to
not a
come
good
to your...
intention.
Yeah, if you like, you can imagine these partisan people. Every time he said anything, he's like, well, I think, and then boom. It's like,
Make sure the window to
Can you
the classroom
imagine?
is open, you know?
It's got to be cool. If I ever run for office, I'm bringing this back. I hope you'll be there to fire the cannon. And then this is stuff for last year. This is just basic. If you wanted to set up an in-class debate, the topic has got to be a clear, declarative statement that can be agreed or disagreed with. Do not use a question. If you use a question, you're setting up the U.S. presidential debates, which nobody likes, but everyone, it's like being addicted to something, really. It's like nobody likes it, nobody wants it, but everyone has to watch it. It's like terrible, terrible. No questions, because as we see from that, you can talk about anything you like. And it seems, it's hard to say whether it's relevant or not. And a good speaker, you'd be like, I don't think it's relevant. Oh, it's really relevant. Tell it's not relevant to the nation's 22 million old people who can't afford prescription drugs, or whatever candidates say. Fixed time limits for speeches. You have to have hard limits. Speakers take turns. They have to go from side to side. And speakers try to convince the audience before them, the other students, to agree with them or not. If you try to make it some fake role-playing thing, like the class is the citizens of Iran or whatever, it's going to be disastrous. It's going to be bad. You're going to get all kinds of terrible essentialism and oversimplistic ideas about what those people are like. And you just don't want to tread there. Convince each other as citizens. We don't practice this. And we rely on it for everything. Anytime there's a controversy in this country, look, we need more debate and discussion. But how many people have a debate and discussion course? Like, they should be starting in the 2nd grade. If we're going to depend on that to make our country's decisions and run the country this way, we're sunk. We're totally sunk. And nobody's learning this stuff, right? So you can't just expect them to do it without any kind of practice. So this is the way that they learn to say, well, I really like that guy, but I didn't like his argument. Or like, I was at a public debate this week in New York, and the speaker who won that debate was really passionate and convincing and a great orator, but he was making terrible, terrible, terrible claims about Islam. But the audience voted for him, and so I told the audience, I was like, you might want to think about it as not that they were snowed by bad information, but they wanted to support a good speaker in spite of what he had to defend. Right? So this is a good lesson too. So, any questions? That's pretty much it. Just some ideas.
Great.
Happy to talk about it.